All right, great. So I haven't got that long. I might have to run relatively quickly through quite a broad swathe of research. So I'm promising you a proposal, which is that we must seize the means of seduction. And hopefully we'll get to the point where that will become clear what I mean. Is this the... All right, great. Okay, first, small print. This is a provocation, exploring an extremely specific purist position that I don't wholly share, but I at least think it's an interesting one to explore. Many might find these ideas objectionable, and that's kind of the point. I don't strongly hold these opinions myself, and I would not die on these hills. Lol. Okay, I know it's late in the day, but can I get a GM? Good morning, GM. GM, mornings are good. This is a reference to a greeting among Bitcoin and blockchain users and followers on social media. This joke, such as it is, refers to the value of getting involved in a given crypto finance proposition early and the expectation of a bright future. Unkind, possibly. Let's see. So, we're here at the Cypherpunk Congress. So am I going to talk about cypherpunk? Or am I going to talk about its negative? I'm going to first introduce to you a concept that I cooked up for the first Cypherpunk Congress in November last year in Bangkok, which I call sapphirepunk. And cipher is the Arabic word for zero, and that's actually where cipher and zero in Western languages come from. And my proposal is that Ethereum isn't actually cypherpunk, never was, but it can be cypherpunk. Okay, so let's look at the etymology, the history of this phrase. Cypherpunk itself, this playful fusion of cipher and punk and cyberpunk, came from Jude Malone, aka St. Jude, who was a prominent early figure in hacker culture of the late 20th century. So as you know, the cypherpunks advocated for the use of strong cryptography to achieve privacy and security in our increasingly digital world. And so, like this phrase originally came, the concept of cipher as zero came from Arabic. The Arabs borrowed it from India, and Sanskrit contains the concept of shunya. And you could even trace this concept of the nothing, the void, and the zero as a computational number back to Babylon and back to Mayan civilizations. Okay, let's move on. So I want to talk to you about utopia. And this is something that Daira mentioned earlier about the warning to not take the techno-utopians at their word. Utopia begins with a promise. It constitutes a promise. It comes from the 16th century work of Thomas More, and it was about an island, fictional island, and the idiosyncratic ways of the monastic traditions of the people that lived on it. And this concept was meant to represent no place, as in, this is an impossible place. This is a fiction. This is something you cannot have. But because U, the letter U, and AU, EU, sound the same in English, there's a linguistic slip between the no place and the true place. AU is the prefix for true in Greek. And I believe that it's this linguistic ambiguity that's given some space for the so-called techno-utopians to insert some very damaging and dangerous promises that still persist in the world today. All right, we said that. So here's a classic picture. Many of you probably recognize it. It's the MIT Wearable Computing Group from the 90s, I suppose. And funnily enough, the group that I'm involved in at MIT is kind of a descendant of this. So these are sort of my colleagues. And I want to read you a couple of quotes from the early days of the cypherpunk movement. Some of them are documented in the printouts that you can find upstairs. So this is Timothy C. May, Crypto Anarchist Manifesto, 1988. Just as the technology of printing altered and reduced the power of medieval guilds and social power structure, so too will cryptologic methods fundamentally alter the nature of corporations and government interference in economic transactions. Combined with emerging information markets, crypto anarchy will create a liquid market for any and all material which can be put into words and pictures. Well, that sounds nice. Hughes, the classic. I won't go too far into this, but I just picked out a little nugget for you. We, the cypherpunks, are dedicated to building anonymous systems. We are defending our privacy with cryptography, with anonymous mail forwarding systems, with digital signatures, and with electronic money. And then from Timothy C. May again in '94, we will be the colonizers of cyberspace. And then my last stop on this historical tour is John Perry Barlow, 96, the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. And I'll leave it for you to decide as to whether those lofty, if a little pompous, proclamations and declarations have borne their fruit in the last 3 decades. So, this is what we were promised. And this is what we got. And I'm going to argue that we have fallen far short of the cypherpunk dream. So, many of you know about the history and the trajectories of software and sovereignty. The one thing I wanted to pick out is this book that is often quoted by cypherpunks, Bitcoiners, and now the network statists, The Sovereign Individual by James Dale Davidson and William Rees-Mogg. And this, in many ways, presaged the technological turn of libertarianism, for better or for worse. Many of you are familiar with, oh gosh, what's his name? Raymond. The Raymondian concept of the cathedral and the bazaar. I also won't go into it here because it's some very well-trodden history for the people in this particular room. The concept of the price of anarchy and the concept of the tyranny of structurelessness are two of the corollaries and counterpoints to the sovereign individual and the cathedral and the bazaar. I will leave those as placeholders for you to look into more in the interest of time. So, this is a picture I took in Bangkok last year. The gated community of Ethereum, one might say. And I want to talk today. It's my turn to give you the bad news. That's why it's so late in the day. That the reason why I think Ethereum has never been and can never be cypherpunk is because of that really bad thing that happened a long time ago that we never talk about. It was called the DAO. Some of you in this room were in that room as well. I was in that room too. And there was a promise, the techno-utopian promise of the DAO. We can actually do stuff with Ethereum. We can build these decentralized institutions. And there were warnings from researchers, some of whom are in the room, particularly Dino Mark, Vlad Zamfir, and Emin Gunsaya, not to hurry the implementation of the DAO. And, well, we all know what the rest of history was. I wanted to show you this very unkind image. This is what the Bitcoiners think of Web3 and Ethereum. They think that if you can delete people's balances at will, what's even the fucking point? What are we doing here? So again, this is not what I think. Don't shoot this messenger. Okay, and there's been, as you know, we're in this room together, there's been somewhat of a renaissance of trying to bring back the idea of cypherpunk in the context of contemporary technology. You have articles by people like Vitalik saying things like, make Ethereum cypherpunk again. But if you look at this article closely, you will actually see that most of all of the examples and all of the virtues that Vitalik is borrowing from are those of Bitcoin. So if I was being unkind, I would say that this neo-cypherpunk movement is stealing the valor of what came before it. Okay, some of you might remember Coder's Law. It's a very old-fashioned concept. I suppose now that there's that movie, people might be revisiting this idea. But a lot of people actually believed this was real 10 years ago. The idea that, Lessig and Mitchell conceived it in the 90s, in the early days of the internet, and it kind of became more of a concrete proposition with blockchains. So this is from Lessig in the 90s. Coder's Law, a form of regulation where private actors may embed their values onto technological artifacts. So, meme break. I don't know if some of you will recognize the image on the screen. If you don't know what it is, I'm happy for you. Fractals don't care about your feelings. Systems disregard their externalities, and formalisms cannot reason about the real. Okay, so Coder's Law. What does that even mean? Because we know that the law changes if we're going to talk about legal systems. And so realities change, technologies change, jurisdictions change, and the law changes. So if the code doesn't change, what kind of law are we even talking about here? Natural laws? Well, I would argue that even natural laws aren't laws in the ironclad sense that this expression seeks to borrow from. Okay, I would say there's more than a hint of algorithmic formalism in the idea of code is law and more generally in the blockchain world. I won't go into it too much, but I will just say that it borrows it's an analogical leap from legal formalism. And there's a great paper from 2020, the FAT conference by Salom Villuin and Ben Green called Algorithmic Realism, which I think you should all read. So, meme break. A computer can never be held accountable. Therefore, a computer must never make a management decision. And that's a slide from a 1979 IBM presentation. And that's Joey Tribbiani from Friends on the other side. Some of you might be old enough to remember who that is. But in the corner, in 2025, it seems that a computer can be management. And I believe that Joey Tribbiani is right to be concerned. Okay, so that was cypherpunk. And now I want to talk to you very briefly about sufferpunk. And for me, sufferpunk is a very specific thing, which we'll get to in a minute. Another poetic refrain with a clue in it. The church and the network, zeal and time, death and money, all sides of the same coin. And which coin? The coin that started it all, Bitcoin. I see Bitcoin as an inhuman monetary system. And I'll give you a very brief description about what I mean. You can read a much grander elaboration in the second issue of the Philosophical Journal of Agorism on an article called Necro-Primitivism Rising. Aside from a single course difficulty adjustment feedback mechanism, Bitcoin's proof of work is insensate. It cannot care about what happens outside of its borders, only that the piper is paid. Proof of work pits capital and ecology against each other in a prisoner's dilemma style paradox that could tip the balance in favor of a hothouse Earth. All right, you're all doubtless familiar with the way that Bitcoin works, burning all this energy to achieve this leaderless consensus, and the amount of energy that Bitcoin requires only increases. Every time I update this slide, I have to squash the y-axis. So I call Bitcoin an indifference engine, riffing on Babbage's concept. As a consequence of keeping proof of work stochastic block clock regular, Bitcoin is insatiable. Furthermore, you could say it's insensate. It cannot care about what happens outside of its perimeters. So I want to then take this lack of care and re-territorialize it from the metaphysics of Bitcoin onto our planet, which is what the Balajian concept of network states is all about. And I'm writing a book about this, which, by the time the next one comes around, hopefully I'll have copies in my hand. Balaji is an extremist, and he is advocating for a form of tech Zionism. And you don't even have to believe me. I've just screenshotted an interview with him. There's the transcript. He says it. He wants to be a tech Zionist. So this is just the entirety of years of research into the Balajian concept of the network state in one meme, that they think they found a gap in the global polis, but really what they've done is ignored the global polis. And so I want to give you just a brief teaser of a couple of texts, one book and one article that are going into print very soon. So the work I'm doing at the moment is a historical analysis comparing the Balajian form of the network state to the medieval crusader states, the crusader kingdoms that the Latin genociders made in the eastern shores of the Levant at the end of the 11th century. What if the medieval crusades never truly ended? Instead, what if they became the template upon which modernity was modeled, a blueprint that reveals its true horror in our current age of techno-fascism? Enough of that. Okay. With their dreams of new network state empires, resource extraction, and supremacist domination, today's tech overlords are the descendants of Europe's crusaders. Though the methods have evolved, the Western will to power and conquest, the chainmail gaze itself, remains the same 1,000 years later. The cultural logic of the crusade, a righteous, civilization-defining ideological war, has left its indelible mark, on the world's past, present, and possible futures. And well, if you don't agree with me, you'll have to read my book to find out what I really think. And this text is about to drop very soon on the Slovenian press Axioma on software as fascist operating system, not unrelated concept. Okay, so what can we do about this? What can we do about this creeping onset of techno-authoritarianism? Well, I would contend that we need to arbitrage against the machine, and I have some proposals on how we do that. Sorry. Okay, so I don't have that much time to elaborate these things, so I just want to give you a flavor. In ancient Greece, first in the Ionian region of the Aegean, and then in Athens itself, there was this concept of isonomia, equality before the law. And one of the ways that they tried to make the law equal and make it resistant to coercion and capture was to use the method of sortition, random number sampling, which has now found itself into the blockchain space now that we've developed, if nothing else, what we've done with blockchain is develop and improve the ways that we can use cryptography and apply it in different contexts. So we've had cryptographic sortition as long as Silvio Micali developed this, and it got implemented in a certain blockchain, which I'm not going to mention. But we have ways of using cryptography and to harness randomness, and we can apply that to make time-limited citizen assemblies, like juries, to govern polities, and that mitigates the problem of charismatic formation when we have these charismatic, strong people, authoritarians, that get elected through populist manipulation of the media and of the populace at large. And then once they're in charge, they dismantle the systems of governance from the inside. I mean, we are in Argentina. I don't need to elaborate so much further. Take a look at the world around you. And the other one, is piratical governance. And so think about the pirate ship. Think about the captain and think about the mutiny. You're all familiar with the concept of the mutiny. What is the mutiny? Like, if the captain loses the confidence of the shipmates, they are dropped off at the nearest rock or made to walk the proverbial plank. And so what the mutiny, the cultural logic of the mutiny really is a continual renegotiation of the power structures of the polity under the formalized and persistent threat of revolution. And so I think we need to bring back the mutiny. Okay, and the last thing I want to leave you with is something a bit more positive. I appreciate I've largely been the bearer of not great news, so let's try and fabricate at least a semi-sincere happy ending at the end of all of this. And so, earlier this year, a group of researchers, including myself, with humanities and anthropological backgrounds, got together to write a counter-proposal to the Cypherpunk manifesto. We thought of this as a post-cypherpunk movement, and this bore the fruit of a document that we call the Sapphirepunk manifesto. And I'm going to take the rest of my time until they throw me off stage to elaborate some of that. So just to call back first to Eric Hughes's 93 manifesto. And I don't want to go into the details. Just look at the title. A, individual, cypherpunks, possessive, manifesto. And I believe that the title alone betrays the worldview that these documents came out of possessive, of market supremacy, and of individuality. And like, those things aren't terrible in themselves in the theoretical domain. But when we look at what has been born of the 10 years of Web3 and the almost 20 years of Bitcoin, well, I see a lot of individualism and I see a lot of possessiveness. And somebody said earlier that they didn't want to say that the problem is capitalism. Well, I will say that the problem is capitalism. Okay, you can read this at sapphirepunk.com. And I'll try to give you the rest of my time to explain and elaborate some of that. So, the old cypherpunk dream is dead. Privacy isn't a bunker, it's a commons. Sovereignty is never in isolation, it's always in relation. We refuse acceleration without direction, optimization without ethics, and autonomy without care. We do not merely seek privacy, we seek solidarity. We reimagine cryptographic tools as instruments of communion, not alienation. There is no security through insecurity. The world cannot be protected by cryptography alone. We are the sapphirpunks. We inherit the tools of cryptographic resistance and invoke them not for escape, but for togetherness. Privacy is not a bunker, it's a commons. Sovereignty is never in isolation, it's always in relation. Sapphirepunk is a call for a reformation, not a rejection of the original cypherpunk ideals, but a reckoning for today's world. We summon forth new poetic and political imaginaries that expand beyond the sovereign individual into the plural and the planetary. We demand the crafting of technologies that nurture meaning, resilience, and communal flourishing. We will not passively receive the futures we deserve. We must collectively bring them into being. Be your own punk. And I'm quoting here from my colleague and co-writer, Sasha Shalina. Punk was rebellion, stripped to its bones. 3 chords, a sneer, a Molotov. It collapsed under its own intensity, burned bright and fast. What came next was post-punk, angular, anxious, experimental. The ruins of punk were rebuilt into cathedrals of sound, jagged, intellectual, haunted. And that's a quote from Simon Reynolds, who actually spoke on this stage yesterday at a different event. Cypherpunk, similarly, began as a rebellion against surveillance, centralization, and censorship. It built tools to disappear, to resist the state, to exit. But now we see its children, DAOs, DIDs, ZK coordination, decentralized science, etc., not as weapons, but as instruments in a symphony of governance, play, art, and new forms of collective life. And that's a Buterin quote from 2019. Against maximalist totality, where the cypherpunks whispered, cypherpunks write code, the post-cypherpunks ask, what else can be composed from these primitives? They treat blockchains not just as infrastructure, but as medium, like the synthesizer was to post-punk. And just like the post-punks were suspicious of utopias, the post-cypherpunks are suspicious of maximalism. There is no silver bullet, no pure ledger, no one chain to rule them all. There are just fragments, partialities, and interlinking protocols giving us a dissonant harmony. Enter sapphirepunk. Born from this tension between defense and design, privacy and plurality, sapphirepunk proposes a new frame for thinking about digital autonomy, care, and cryptographic infrastructure, where the cypherpunk imagine privacy as an individual right to disappear. Where the sapphirepunk sees it as the foundation of relation, trust, and commons. Encryption without ethics of care is merely a harder shell around the same old oppression. And then how? How can we be sapphirine? How can we resemble and exhibit the qualities of a sapphirepunk? Well, I'm going to tell you. If the cypherpunk era gave us the bunker and the post-cypherpunk imagination gave us the garden, then sapphirepunk offers the third image, the gem, a structure. Sapphire is a crystal of clarity, forged under pressure, impossible to fake. Across cultures, it has symbolized sincerity, wisdom, and protection. In medieval law, it shielded the wearer from poison and envy. In its metaphysics, it channels truth. To build sapphirepunk architecture and infrastructure is to build durable transparency, refined insight, and relational clarity. It is to believe that code can carry not just power, but care. Not maximalism, but multiplicity. Not extraction, but craft. Sapphire refracts. It does not blind. It sharpens. It glows. And I will just finish here by giving you the call to reimagine. Come and reimagine with us new possible futures beyond the sovereign individual and the dead ends of individualism, selfishness. Like, let's see new ways through this maze. We don't have to be rats in the labyrinth of capitalism. There are other futures that we must collectively bring them to bear. Thank you very much.